afternoon, everyone. My name's Jess Castles. I'm a part-time PhD candidate from the BEST Centre and ARC Training Centre at QUT. Today I'll be presenting my first study, which is currently awaiting ethics approval. So I'm looking forward to getting some feedback. So at its core, this research is about innovation, specifically cosmetic biomedical innovation, which is innovation in cosmetic surgery. So ultimately, this research is seeking to understand patient resistance to this type of innovation, and we're doing that by investigating how patients imagine innovation. So a key theoretical lens we use in this research is the imagined customer experience, which I'll explain a little later on in this presentation. So let's start broad. What is innovation? Almost anything can be an innovation as long as it's perceived as new. There are obvious benefits to innovation, but the failure rate is extremely high, between 40 to 90%, with more on the upper end of this scale. Innovation failure is seen as when an innovation is not accepted, implemented, or used regularly enough to remain profitable. So we know what innovation is, but what about cosmetic biomedical innovation? This is an under-reviewed field, but a huge growth market. The cosmetic surgery industry is worth $1.3 billion and has a projected growth rate of 3.3%. Females account for over 87% of all cosmetic surgical procedures, and they are most commonly seeking treatments for the breast, face, and butt. This is a really important area of research, as it's very much distinct from medical innovation, which is designed to treat illness or ailments. These are some examples of what we're talking about when we say cosmetic biomedical innovation. You can see that there are different breast implant technologies, face, body treatments. These are the types of innovations that are constantly evolving in the industry right now. So there is one key trend that makes this such an important area of research, and that is that patient autonomy is increasing. We are seeing patients being empowered by the number of resources that are now available to them, and they're doing more external research. This is a growing issue because around 96% of biomedical innovations fail. This means that there are countless patients that are not accessing potentially life-saving and life-changing innovations. And that's really the problem. The broad issue is that there is resistance to innovation, and the core managerial problem is that biomedical companies face this patient resistance despite the potential benefits these innovations have for the patient. So to address this problem, we started with a literature review, and it has two main pillars: innovation and customer experience. So starting off with innovation, we know that innovation has a number of definitions, but it's essentially anything that is perceived as new by the subject. A seminal framework is Rogers' diffusion of innovation, which basically tells us how innovation will be adopted by certain groups in society, and it can help us to understand innovation failure. The two key paradigms in the literature are adoption and resistance. So the main thing to know is that adoption has a pro-change bias, while resistance assumes that people have a status quo bias. They don't want to change. These two are not the opposite of one another, but rather they are distinct concepts. We look specifically at innovation resistance in this research because with a 96% failure rate, patients are clearly not open to change in this context. The resistance literature has two seminal frameworks that state resistance can either be passive or active and can be categorized into rejection, postponement, and opposition. There are also a number of general antecedents that come out of the literature that can be seen on the screen here. So these are the factors that have been found to predict innovation resistance across the broad literature. We don't, however, know about the specific factors that lead to resistance to biomedical innovation. In fact, within the field of biomedical innovation, the research is mostly contained to the medical field, and anything in the context of cosmetic surgery is generally aimed at practitioners rather than patients. The main takeaway is that the power of the practitioner is decreasing and patient-driven research is increasing. So the clear challenge is that we have patients that are now taking the reins, but innovations is unfamiliar. They're relying on factors such as perceived product image, perceived risk, so patients are creating an imagined customer experience of innovation, and they're relying on this to guide their behavior. Well, what is the imagined customer experience? It refers specifically to a consumer's expectations of the customer experience. It's contrasted with the actual customer experience, which is an holistic construct that encompasses all aspects of the consumer journey. Gentile's framework is a seminal framework that's used to measure customer experience and encompasses physical, emotional, and social aspects. The issue is that almost all the research done in this field is relying on post-purchase data, so we don't really have a very accurate understanding of expectations in this context. So the imagined customer experience literature is really scarce. It has not been applied to any biomedical context, let alone the cosmetic context. So there's a clear opportunity here because, as we said earlier, patients are relying on their imaginations to guide their behaviours. So this construct has some significant implications to addressing our managerial problem. So I really condensed that literature down, but these are the research gaps and questions. So essentially we're looking at how the imagined customer experience shapes patient resistance, what the factors leading to this resistance are, and whether there are differences between the imagined experience of different types of innovation. So before we get into the method, I'll just explain the scope of the research. So the scope of the research is cosmetic biomedical innovations aimed at the breast, face, and butt. We're looking at a female patient sample. As I discussed earlier, these are the most common services and customers in the industry, which is why they've been chosen. These are 6 actual innovations that have been chosen to look at in this study, and they were just found through online search. They've been categorised into their body area as well as the stage of innovation. So we're wanting to really gain an holistic view of innovation by encompassing multiple stages in this research. So getting into the method, the study will recruit 36 participants. They'll be females over the age of 18 living in Australia who are interested in breast augmentation, facelift or butt lift in the next 5 years. So these 3 procedures will correlate with the innovations in the table we just looked at. We'll be recruiting women by posting to women-only forums on Facebook about the study with a registration link and a questionnaire. We will be conducting semi-structured interviews via Zoom call, as well as the interviews will be recorded and transcribed. So this is an example of a visual stimulus that will be provided to the patients before their interview. So they will receive 2 of these for the 2 innovations that relate to their procedure of interest. So this stimulus basically provides an overview of the innovation to give patients some background, and they all have the same level of detail and same layout. So when preparing the actual interview guide, we've relied on some theoretical frameworks. I would love some feedback on the first framework as I want to can it. So if anybody has any suggestions for me, that would be amazing. So this first framework is the health state valuation framework. So basically the upper arm of this framework is a way of looking at the imagined customer experience. But what I'm really looking for is a framework that conceptualizes how people imagine experiences, whether they be services, events, basically the future. I'm on the hunt for a framework that can help me analyze imagination and how people think about prospective events or products. So if anybody has any ideas, please let me know. We'll also be using Gentile's framework to analyse the customer experience, and this is a tried and true framework that I have a lot of experience using. So the interview guide will encompass 3 stages. So stage A, that intends to just discover how much the participant knows and what their experience has been with cosmetic surgery in the past. The second stage aims to evaluate the imagined customer experience, and we'll hopefully use a new, different framework for this part. Finally, the final stage of the interview guide will look at some responses to the innovation through a theoretical lens, and we will also consider some questions surrounding rejection, postponement, and opposition to understand resistance behaviours from patients. So while this study does look at resistance to innovation, it really uses the imagined customer experience to open up the conversation and allow for novel insights that aren't tied to what we already know about the factors leading to resistance. As you can imagine, if we were to use a traditional resistance framework, we would be limiting ourselves to what we already know about resistance. So we want to find more out about this unique context. And to analyse the data, we'll be transcribing and using in vivo software. That's all right.